BP is now facing more than 150 lawsuits related to the Gulf Coast oil disaster. That number will surely go up. The claimants include thousands of fishermen, shrimpers, other Gulf Coast businesses. More than half of the active or senior judges in key Gulf Coast districts have ties to oil, gas, and other related industries. Some even actually own BP stock. So who will have jurisdiction over these cases? Let's bring in our legal panel. Former prosecutor and professor of media law at Seton Hall University, Paul Callan. Fox News legal analyst, Lise Wheels. So, Paul, I mean, who gets this? Who decides?
Well, there's a panel of 7 judges that are designated by the federal government, and they evaluate the cases, and they make a decision as to where would be the fairest place to try it and who would be the most appropriate judge. There are about 150 cases that have been filed now. I think there are going to be thousands of cases. It'll probably be one of the biggest cases in U.S. history. So where it's going to be tried is really important.
You know, the defendants would probably like to be in Houston. You'd have a little bit more oil-friendly audience there. And
but what about Louisiana and places that where the victims are? Because do you really want the victims to have to travel on their own dime with their own lawyers to other jurisdictions? No, I say get it in the place where the victims are. And if you have to...
But that's not fair to the defendant, though.
It's not fair at all to the defendant. And, you know, in a case like this, I'm sorry, Lise, but in a case like this, I mean, I think you want a neutral place.
Right, a neutral jurisdiction.
Yes, maybe New York or Chicago.
How about a neutral judge by bringing down a neutral judge from New York who's already tried?
Yeah, but what if there's a jury trial for some of these claims, right?
Well, and so what? So a neutral judge can't...
Well, no, you're going to pick a jury from a sympathetic jurisdiction.
But that's how it is. When the damage happens in a jurisdiction, you pick the jurors from that jurisdiction.
Well, not always. You got to find fair and impartial jurors.
Well, you do, and that's why sometimes, particularly in a high-profile case, you change the venue, you change the jurisdiction to find a place where people can be fair.
Usually within the state. You don't go out of state.
Well, now the Timothy McVeigh case, they moved it to Denver, Colorado from Oklahoma City, because of pretrial publicity, jurisdictional sympathies.
And it's this is a federal case. We can pick any federal jurisdiction in the United States. And BP obviously does business in every state.
Either. You don't want to be forum shopping so you can go from one place to the other just to get where you think you're going to get the best judge or the best jury.
But
that's not fair
to the
Lise,
here, there's another big issue here, though. One of the reasons it's hard to find somebody in Houston or in Louisiana, these judges all own oil stock. I mean, 50% of the judges who are sitting down there own a piece of BP and other oil companies.
And Paul, you would admit that's a great avenue for an appeal, whether you win or lose, whichever side you're on. That's a great avenue for appeal.
But let's find a place where people don't own oil stocks. Let's find a place where the judge isn't
that would be Mars. I mean, where are you going to find that?
I don't have any. Do you?
No, I don't either.
Look, there's got to be a bunch of judges, especially federal judges, who, you know, by the way, they don't make a load of money, so they might not have. Some might not have.
I just think it's more likely that in the Gulf Coast and in Texas, where the industry is concentrated, the judges are going to own it down there.
To the area rather than, I mean, inconvenience one judge for that amount of time versus having all those victims have to travel.
But judges are meant to be
how do you get a fair trial?
They should be inconvenienced.
I mean, can you seriously think you're going to get a fair trial in front of somebody who lives in Louisiana and has been destroyed by this?
You've got to change the venue, no question.
Yes, it's got to be changed.
All right, I want to change slightly. There's this discussion going on at Capitol Hill and elsewhere that, there's a $75 million cap on liability for BP. That's nonsense, because look at this. I checked the statute on this. It doesn't apply, A, to cleanup costs, and the cap doesn't apply if the spill is caused by gross negligence or willful misconduct, or if federal safety regulations were violated. I mean, the last one is a given.
The cap does not apply here. Paul and I were talking about this earlier, and we disagree. The cap does not apply here. Can you imagine, I mean, going back to the Ford Pinto recalls in the 1970s where there were memos saying these cars are going to blow up, and the company just kept producing the cars. If you keep a cap like that on, you're saying to businesses, fine.
Right.
This is
be reckless.
Yeah, be reckless. Do whatever you want. This is your ultimate revenge.
I mean, there are two things here. Number one is if the cap doesn't apply, well, it doesn't make any difference anyway. They can be, and you're saying under existing law, and I think you're right, probably the cap isn't applicable. But if it was, if Congress handed down a law and said, $75 million, that's the maximum. I think it would be unfair to go back. That's like saying, you know, we're going to lower the speed limit, you know, after you're caught doing 60 miles an hour. That wouldn't be fair, and it would put companies out of business.
The cap doesn't apply. I want to talk about something else.
You can grandfather something back
I can hear the cacophony of calls for punitive damages in this case, so I actually reread the Exxon Valdez Supreme Court case. And the Supreme Court said the punitive damages may not exceed the actual damages except when a company deliberately and maliciously causes injury.
Exactly.
Does that apply here?
Exactly. Knowingly causes injury.
Right.
Knowing that this was going to happen. Absolutely.
So you could have punitive damages, Lise, that could absolutely put BP into bankruptcy for sure.
Yeah, that's destroy the company. That's a destroy the company scenario. But you know,
well, maybe that's a good idea.
Well, I don't know. You know, you have to consider the world economy in this case too. You know, BP is a major player worldwide. They say it could bankrupt the British economy. They say this is a situation that the entire world has to worry about. So I don't know. I don't know if I want to put BP out of business.
I'm thinking more of the 11 men that were killed and the disaster, the ecological disaster that we see day after day after day that is not being cleaned up by people that should have known.
Nobody would quarrel about that, Lise, but I think we want the company to stay in business so they'll be able to pay damages. If they're out of business, where does the money come from?
I got to cut it off. I'm up against a hard wrap. Paul Callan, Lise Wheel, good discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, good
to do it again.